might be the expert on this because I know you're on planes, trains, and automobiles like all the time. When practice plans are set, when you've done all your work, you're sitting at the airport, you're sitting on a plane. What's your go-to show? What are you watching these days?
Oh, you know what? I try not to get into shows per se,
Okay.
um, just because I don't want to get tied up in them, and I can't get stuck in something that's too long. Just the other day actually brought me back to a little bit of my childhood. I like the Netflix does like mini series where there's, I don't know, 4 episodes maybe, docu
Yeah.
series I think they call them, and
Yeah.
I just watched the Mr. McMahon the other day, the wrestling one.
I'm
And
I'm
I mean, I
I'm
don't,
on I'm on episode 2 of that right now.
right? And it brings back so many childhood memories because I mean, everyone watched wrestling when we were kids, Saturday Night Main Event, that sort of thing. Aging myself here for sure, but it was interesting. Um, so I watched that. Um, Actually, I watched part of it. I was in Dubuque last weekend, so quick flight. I was able to catch a couple episodes there, but it's a short one. There's some stories out there when I was working with Washington. I'm not going to go into the stories, obviously, but um, they use the Hershey Center where the Hershey Bears play, and I've spent a lot of time in there. And the people that have been around Hershey for a long time have certainly have some stories from when the WWE came in and put their events on there. It's quite interesting to hear.
I can only imagine. I can only
Yeah.
imagine. And I guess as you say that, this never occurred to me either, but you'd probably be a bit of a savant when it comes to like old school barns around North America. I bet there's probably not a lot you haven't been into. Any places you would say if you ever get a chance to watch a game here, um, do it.
Yeah, I mean the Galt Arena in Cambridge is I don't have the exact, if it's not the oldest rink
The
in
Cambridge,
Canada,
Ontario.
it's, yeah, it's the oldest one in either North America or Canada, or possibly it's, there's stories out there about it. Galt Arena, so that's one. Um I really like, there was a rink I played a little bit of senior hockey in Tilsonburg, and it was an older rink. It had the wood beams, but then they renovated around it and kept the shell. And I've been in a couple like that that are pretty cool arenas. The old rink in Portland is an interesting one. Um, yeah, there's not many of them left out there. It's still cool to see, but at the same time, you get into the newer rinks and everything that comes with it. They're pretty nice. The rinks now, and just everything, the way the ice is in there. And well, I'm speaking of old rinks, Hershey, old
I was
Hershey
gonna
Arena.
say I've heard. I would say like my impression is like just the Hershey Bears. Like that's they've got a great fan base there and ton of history and just overall great place to
Storied
watch a game.
franchise, and just storied city, really. Like, I'd encourage anyone, if you have an opportunity, to go to Hershey and learn more about Milt Hershey and his story. And I mean, the chocolate factory is right there. He's got his Hershey Academy, which is a private school
No
that is
way.
right there. Yeah, for underprivileged kids that he flips the bill for.
Oh, amazing.
Uh, yeah,
Wow.
and it's pretty incredible. It's some school. But the Hershey Arena, I mean, they've got an amusement park right downtown, and the Hershey Arena is right
No
next
way.
door. And I wasn't aware until we were there that Wilt Chamberlain's set the record for most points in a basketball game in that arena. And there's a plaque
Like
and
an
a picture up
NBA
on the
game?
wall. Yeah,
No
yeah.
way.
And but the Zamboni comes out between the benches, and it's wild. And one of the guys was telling me a story there. They said back in the day, it was just um, people spilling beer on one another because they're on top. The seats are so steep, and then all you
Yeah.
could smell throughout the arena was cigars. That's
Oh
how old
man.
that place is.
It's funny. I remember going to the Memorial Cup, and I think it was in Quebec City at the old Colisée. I think this was like in the Rangers won it. So this is 2003 or 2004. But that is my lasting memory was that like the rule was like you could only smoke. You could smoke in the arena, but it was recommended to be polite and just smoke in the staircases because they were like, so you'd walk in to go down a level, and it was just like it was potent. But like by the end of each game, there was just a haze of smoke at the top of the barn, and
Yeah.
that just between that and the smell of the hot dogs, it just added to the whole experience.
Well, and I can remember being younger, once again, dating myself, but there was very much like the plains. I don't remember it on the plains, but the arenas, like where I grew up in Port Stanley, really small town, they had a designated smoking section in the arena. Like this
Yeah,
section, it's like now
yeah.
sometimes they have dry sections in arenas where you can't drink. It's more of a family friendly. This rink had a designated smoking section. Like it made a big difference if there was enough people in there smoking. It was throughout the entire rink. So yeah, it's times have changed.
They sure have. Have you been out to Tahoe yet to see their setup? Because your guys is your I guess East Coast or Single A affiliates based out of there now. Tim Tebow's the owner, part
Yeah,
owner.
yeah, Tim Tebow's part owner. I haven't been out there yet. I spoke with the coach a little bit, and he says it's a beautiful setup. They're not. They haven't even started camp yet because they've got to wait for the American League camps to finish up, and then the coast camps will start up. I think in another week. So I'll wait for them to get their camp out of the way and get that stuff going. And the thing about the East Coast is their schedules are so crazy. It's tough to find times to go in there sometimes because they're like they'll play, you know, Friday, Saturday, and then again on Tuesday or Wednesday, and it's almost like a major junior schedule, but possibly even more hectic because some of the teams have a lot more travel.
Well, so like we're in the NHL season is a week away. I know just talking to a few coaches, American League camps have kind of opened up in the past few days. So that means that obviously the East Coast League will get going here probably within 7 to 10 days. You're working with players now. Like it's not like they've been on the golf course all summer. They've been training. They've been on the ice, refining their game. What do you find is useful, or how can you add value to a player's game? What are you working on at this point in the season, at least at the professional level?
Yeah, I think it's different for every player really, and that's the thing. Especially the professional level and even down major junior level. A lot of the summertime, you go back home and the businesses like I run myself in the
Yeah.
summertime, they want to put players on the ice. This is their business, and when you do that, you've got a group of 15 players, let's say. It's not tailored to any one of those individuals. What I'll usually try and do is blanket skill sets that I feel a lot of them could work on and spend time on those, and then kind of pick, like a 3-step start, for example. Everyone needs work on that, and probably every kid when they're leaving their exit interview is getting that feedback. Your first 3 steps. So that's something in a group setting you can spend a lot of time on. Wall work, you can spend a lot of time on that. There's definitely areas of the game that require more attention. And then when it comes down to that, like who's in your group, what style of player, because you also want, like, it's almost a specialty game now, where you this is my role and I'm going to be the best at it of anyone, and I respect that. I appreciate that a lot. There's still always opportunities to add more layers to your game, but you also don't want to get too far outside of what that player is because it's probably not realistic that some of that stuff is going to be useful to them, at least in the next year, 2 years. So I like to try and build them up, but also make sure you're really refining what your comfort zone is and what's going to make you more valuable the following season than you were the previous season.
Do you find that players are becoming more receptive to some of those details, like when you talk about wall work, etc.? Um, you know, uh, these might not be the appreciated skills of superstar players, but I sense that they're just becoming a required tool in every player's toolbox. But certainly for players that maybe where, the top scorer on their major junior team, this might be something that they might be savvy enough now to recognize, like, hey, I'm going to need this when I go to pro.
Yeah, well, definitely once they've been in pro, I think that's where I always say the first development camp for players is kind of where a switch kind of goes off for them, because they're starting to enter an area where everyone is equal or possibly even a little bit better than them. Typically, the kids going into these development camps are, top tier, let's call it, on their major junior college teams that they're playing on. So they feel like they can do a little bit more. The playing fields are leveled a lot when you go into your first pro camp, and it opens up a lot of players' eyes, I think, and some of them get it, and other ones need a little help to understand that, like you said, the style of game that you played in major junior isn't necessarily going to translate to pro hockey. So if you want to play pro hockey or you want to have a long career, these are things that you're going to have to learn and adapt to and add to your game in order to make that happen. And I mean, for me, it's pretty easy. I think it's harder on major junior coaches. If I roll into with my Vegas Golden Knights jacket on, they're going to listen to everything I say, right?
Yeah.
It's hard and I mean, I think a lot of major junior coaches do a really good job, but kids at that level think, well, I can get away with this, so why wouldn't I do it? And sometimes it's a matter of, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying make sure that you're doing the rest of this too, because at the next level, do A, but make sure you do B, C, and D, because B, C, and D are what's going to translate and transfer to the next level. A might not as much. So it's helping kids. I think it's important for kids and players to understand that. And then even, you've got veteran players that they're adapting new styles to their game because, they've been around the league for a long time. Maybe they're accepting a different role. But when you've been playing in the league for a long time, they've seen it, they've been around it long enough. It's a lot easier for them to understand that and say, okay, this is what I have to do. It's a tougher transition for the young players for sure.
What would be some of the skills that, and I'm sure whatever the conversations are like in Vegas are probably very similar in other organizations, but just in terms of, you mentioned the first three steps or strides when a player is taking off. What may be some of the other details where you're hearing it from, whether it's management or the coaching staff in Vegas, say, hey, like, our young players need to get better generally in these areas to make that step in, either from pro hockey or perhaps from minor pro to the NHL?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest area that, I hear around rinks or wherever is pace. It's being able to adjust. The pace is faster every time you go from one league to another, and it's being able to adapt to that pace and being able to. And pace isn't just being able to skate fast; it's being able to judge the pace, read the play, and adjust your pace accordingly. And I think that's one of the biggest areas that right now players are trying to or having troubles with grasping. It's maybe it's not a matter of the player doesn't have the pace. It's a matter of they're used to playing at a different pace coming out major junior, and it takes
Yeah.
a little bit of time to adjust to that. It's no different than players coming back from an injury, and they always say, getting their pace, getting their timing back. It's once you're off for a long period of time, it's readjusting to that. Coming back from injury, you already know what you're readjusting to. When you're coming out of major junior, it's all
You
new.
don't know.
They
Yeah.
don't know. So they've got to not only adjust to it, but figure out where that is and how they fit into it. Right. And one of the biggest things that I talk to when we talk about skill development is, and this is, in talking about pace, players, when you're doing skill development, quite often, because they hear so much, you have to go hard, you have to go hard, you have to play a pace. I always tell them to slow down, right? Like, I don't want you to rush through this. I don't want you to force yourself to go fast, because then you're going to make the same mistakes that we're trying to correct. I want you to slow it down. I want to get the body movements right. I want to get the technical aspect of it right. And then the speed will come naturally. We can add that pace. We can add that step as long as we get everything moving together and in sync and our body all working together. But I tell people all the time, your skill set is a series of habits. I read a book, and I'm not going to be able to think of the name. It was by James Clear,
Atomic
but it's all
Habits.
about atomic habits. And basically, your skill set is a series of habits, and the only way to introduce a new habit is to break the old one, right? So we've got to take ourselves out of that comfort zone, which would be doing everything at top speeds. We got to slow it down and make sure everything is done. My saying is always, it's I don't expect perfect, but I want it as close to perfect as possible, as close to your perfect as you can possibly get for each rep while we practice this. So then when you go back, it's starting to become your new habit, and that's going to be a movement that is just natural over time. And that's how you fix your skating stride. You have to create a new natural movement for your body.
So fair to say you're probably not going to play Stairway to Heaven like Jimmy Page on the first crack. You're going to have to like go work through it a little bit, and it takes
Yeah.
time, and you might eventually get there. I think that's great advice because I do I've certainly noticed this the hard way. I've got my little guys in U7, and of course, like I'll see just like everybody else, I'll see a video that you put on the coach's site or something that puts on social media. I'm like, oh, like that's a great drill, or we could adapt that, and you realize like there's a and I'm not there yet, but like a really good coach has that ability to break it into those small steps, and just can you just focus on the singular steps, and do you know how to piece them together in the right order so eventually that bigger picture thing might come together.
Well, and when it comes to drills, I'll tell coaches, um, if you take a drill, you can break it into segments and teach the segments before you teach the drill, right? Like
Yeah.
break it down into smaller parts. And then, and this is something you can do with a power play, for example. Run portions of that power play as part of a drill, and don't make drills harder than they have to be. Like if there's something
Great
specific
advice.
you're working on, you're just adding a whole bunch of fluff to it. And I did that. I used to do that to try. Like I was always, we got to get kids moving more. We got to get kids moving. But you're you're glazing over the important part that you're trying to teach by adding extra fluff to it. And I think that you have to spend your time wisely and try and hit the key points there and then move on from there. Like, there's other ways to keep the players moving. You can do it in smaller areas and just instead of doing full ice stuff. There's lots of ways to do that. But if you can break it down into segments, like kids, we don't give them enough credit of all ages, in my opinion. They'll start to recognize it when you add it into another drill or when you add it into your power play or breakout, and they're like, oh, well, this is just like the drill we were doing, but it's bigger or it has more to it. It's just a whole bunch of patterns, right? And I always tell, like, that's one of the things I talk to players about. Like, I have a daughter who's 13. When she was in kindergarten, she learned patterns. That's
Yeah.
all we're
Oh,
doing.
yeah. Great
It's
point.
just a series of patterns. And if you can understand the pattern, now we're going to add skill to it. We're going to add some passing. We're going to add some skating. We're going to add some shooting. It doesn't have to be that hard, but break it down into segments and don't be afraid to stop it. Like when I'm introducing a new drill to young players, I'll break it down. Like I talk about segments, I'll break it down into quarters. Even though it's a full ice drill, they'll go a quarter of the way. I'll stop them. You know where you're going. You know where you're going. You know where you're going. Yep. Okay, go ahead. Stop them again. You know where you're going from here. It's a
Got it.
good way to
That's
learn a pattern, right? And then the other thing I'll do is if I have enough coaches on the ice, you're going, but a coach is going with you. You're just going to follow them. There's lots of different ways that you can teach them those different patterns that they have to do.
you know what? That's great advice. I'm just curious. Would you say that what you just described in terms of having players go through like a quarter of a drill, stopping them, checking for learning or asking good questions, is more effective than say drawing it all out on the board, having them do it incorrectly, bringing them back to the board, explain it again, go back, like just as a maybe a more efficient teaching method?
Yeah, I would do both, to be honest with you, because every kid learns differently, right? Like I'm a
Mm,
visual
yeah,
learner. You can go out and tell me to do this and do this, and it might not make sense to me, but when I see it, I'm like, yeah, okay. And even though you're doing like you're breaking it down, it's still I'm guessing at what they're doing next. I'm guessing at the end product, right? Where if it's on a board
yeah,
first, you draw it out. They might not have a totally great understanding of it, but now you get them into their lines. And okay, we go stop, go stop. It doesn't take long. It doesn't slow down. Like, you want to make best use of your practice, but you've also got to be willing to sacrifice some time for teaching, right? And if it means you have to slow the practice down a little bit to make them understand it better, if you don't do it, you're going to give up on that drill and go back to something a little more basic where I think players can be challenged more at the young ages. And it just requires more patience from the coaches. And then the other thing is coaches give up on, or like I'll do a practice for a young team and I'm drawing a drill and the coaches are standing in the back looking at me going, oh no, there's no way they're going to get this. And I tell them,
Yeah.
I trust these kids that they'll get it. I have faith in them. And then we do it and I stop them and, go through it. And afterwards they're like, oh, we didn't think they'd get that. I'm like, no, you didn't believe that they would get that because you didn't have faith in, like, you were, and it's not a bad thing. It's just, oh, I don't want to
Yeah.
mess up in front of what are all these parents thinking if I can't deliver this drill to the kids, right? And one of the best times during hockey for the sake of development in the kids was during COVID when it was just the kids in the ice, and coaches felt more secure to be able to teach and deliver as opposed to just push the pace all the time. And I'm sure a lot of practices the drills are pretty repetitive because okay, they know these, let's not get too far away from this because it makes practice more smooth, right? Challenge yourself, challenge the kids. That's how they're going to learn more.
That's really interesting. I think that's a great point about COVID. It's funny though. I think it's like knowing your audience too. Like we've started doing this with our little kid group. Is we wanted to challenge the kids too, and we realized it's like we're going to need to do these things back to back to back. So we've sort of structured our season in 3 week blocks, and so we almost do the same drills. We might, but we kind of know going in what are some of the ways to elevate them, but just so the kids can get them, they can get better at the drills. And that way, like, because we found trying to challenge them as one off like that got messy. And this way they can kind of give them the runway to figure it out. But I'll tell you what, I've learned so much about just learning and appreciating that every kid does learn differently. And, there was a great article. I would encourage anybody here that has a, subscription to The Athletic. There's a great article on Kevin O'Connell, who's the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, and I mean they're having a great start. But he's a former quarterback, offensive mind, savant, and it just talks with the players, and they like these are pros, and they're like his gift is making the complex simple. Like he just is he goes he and then he talks about how much emphasis he puts on the language, the explanation, and just being mindful of how do you make the complex simple. And that's my takeaway from it. Like that's sort of how he views the central role in his job is how he communicates to his players.
Yeah, and you said that you do the same drills, but you also said you have 3 blocks, right? So you're
Yeah.
not doing the same drills the entire year, right? You've got
Yeah.
a block here, and that's fine. Like I've had a couple of years where I'll introduce a drill, and I always say I've got 2 or 3 favorites that I'll do them sporadically out in the course of the entire year. I won't do
Yeah.
them every single practice, but I find that they're really good drills. They're useful. They're teaching a lot. So I'll use them sporadically out the entire year, but I'm always trying to introduce something new, right? Like for the longest time, they've said, they always say you can't teach hockey sense, right? That's something that old school, and it's still around to this day. And to a certain extent, it's true because some people are gifted in certain areas, right? But with that being said, I always like to say, if your practices, I relate it to working in a factory. If your practices are the same every day, it's like standing on the end of an assembly line. You don't have to think to do your job. You just go through the motions. But if you add something new, you throw a twist in there, it forces them to think. Now, when they get into a game, they're going to be thinking like they have to in practice. Otherwise, you're going back to the habits. You're creating a habit of having every time you're on the ice during practice to not have to think. How are you supposed to all of a sudden flip a switch when you go into a game and all this stuff is going on around you and you're used to just going through the motions? I think you've got to add variety. You've got to add challenge to them. Make them think. Let them fail. And to all the parents out
Yeah.
there, don't get on the coaches when the players fail. that's all part of coaching. I want the players to fail.
Part of learning too.
That's where it gives me the best opportunity to teach, right? I mean, if they did everything perfectly, then what's the point of having people like me around, right? What's the point of having coaches around? But when they
Yeah,
fail,
you wouldn't have a business. I wouldn't have a podcast. We'd all be, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it is there's so much pressure from parents in the hockey world, and it's like give them a chance because it's only gonna by having the support of the parent group, it's gonna make your coach better. It's gonna allow him to be better. So I think we got to give them a little more leeway. And there's some coaches out there that I honestly believe coaches, skill people, whatever it might be, I think can do a better job of doing their homework more, whether it be watching more hockey, reaching out to people to ask questions, extend your network to be able to reach out to someone and ask those questions. But I mean, don't let your game get stale either. To always try and build off of it. And I mean, I'm going to Vegas next week. I'll to work with our American League team. I'll go and watch the big club open up on Tuesday night. I think it is. We open up against Colorado, and when I watch the hockey game, I miss large chunks of it because I'm watching for specific things. Like when a puck's coming up a wall, I want to see how this player gets it off the wall. I want to because I don't make the things up that I teach. I watch the best players in the world do it, and maybe I put my own little spin on it sometimes, or I tweak it for certain players. But the stuff that I teach is coming from the players that are doing it, and they're the best players in the world, right? And anytime that I can share that knowledge with local coaches or anything, like it's only going to make the future of hockey better if we can kind of pass that along and kind of like what you're doing with your seminars and things like that. Like the
Yeah.
coaches should be taking that information and reaching out to the presenters and anyone afterwards and seeing if they can pick their brains. Or I mean, we're all human. If you want to sit me down for a 5-hour conversation, I don't know if I can buy into that because I'm busy, but you got a question or something, reach out to these people, and because it's only going to make the future of hockey better when everyone can kind of get on the same page with how it's being delivered and the skills that are being taught. And I mean, you're never going to streamline it completely, but I feel like it's gone to the point where, it used to be a small thing and now it's almost to the point where it's too much for kids. There's too much information for them to consume, and they're they're missing out on some of their core skills in order to practice more of the skills that if they do use them, they're not going to use them as frequently, kind of like we talked about in the very beginning.
I sense that, and we've certainly gleaned this from, we're fortunate to work with a lot of, organizations that are pretty adept at player development. And I think the one thing that stands out to me is they aren't afraid to keep it simple, and that their coaches go into the year knowing that your job is not to teach um, the entire game. Like your players just need to come out of this year with these usually, and I would say it's generally two or three things, and it's skill based. And
Yeah.
it's like by the end of the year, your players have to be able to do linear crossovers. They have to be able to catch and receive a puck on their backhand. And, here's how we're going to measure, how they've advanced, and say something like timing. And it might be and it's just like, you can like, just keep going back to these three things. Cause next year, the next coach they're going to have their two or three things, and they have that confidence that, through, maybe a 10-year period, that they can put all the pieces together, develop, as you say, those habits. And that just seems to be, I would say, like almost universally, the secret sauce to player development is just knowing what to say no to.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest problem that we have right now is the social media side of it, in many ways, because players, for example, like I just got done saying I miss a lot of the game because I'm watching how players pick up pucks off the wall. Most players nowadays strictly watch highlights because the only spot they're seeing everything is on social media, and they don't show a guy picking a rim up off the wall. They don't show a guy, protecting a puck and spinning off a check or something like that. They're showing the goals. They're showing. So that's one of the biggest problems when it comes to the game side of things, but also on the skill development side of things. How often do you see a post about someone breaking down their stride? It's boring. No one's interested in that. It's not going to get followers, right? So everyone steers away from that. But if you can, do the Michigan or whatever, and like, okay, people are going to click on that. So it's all just clickbait, clickbait. I think we've talked about this in the past, and it's still to this day. I'm like,
We have, yeah.
I see players, and it's like, oh, great, you can pick the puck on your stick, but your crossovers are awful, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, if you can't do the the core skills, everything else on top of that is irrelevant. It's you got to be able to play at professional level. You got to be able to skate. That's the bottom line. You've got to be able to skate. We talked about pace earlier. You got to be able to adjust it. But when it's time to go, you better be able to go, because if you can't keep up, you're not going to be able to play.
No, 100%. And and I'd be curious just to ask you, like, I think it gets underappreciated the amount of reps it takes, not just in a practice, not just in a season, but over a career to develop some of these skills. And like skating is a prime example. It's not like you spend a couple weeks in the off season working on crossovers and just boom, those are better. Like I sense, and skating is a great example, but I sense in the same way that the best golfers in the world still go hit several hundred balls before each round and refine each club in their bag. Like it takes, this is something you're always working on and always refining.
Yeah, and I use the golf example a lot because
So is your head
like
coach.
there's
He loves using golf analogies.
yeah, well, but the thing is, there's a people out there that think you can't change the way someone skates. And I always
Yeah.
refer to, well, people go to golf coaches all the time. You probably go to a golf coach because, hey, you can fix my swing. Well, once again, take the sport out of it. It's still a movement, right?
Yeah.
And a movement is just a series of habits. So if you can fix your movements in a golf swing, you can fix your movements in the skating. I'm a firm believer in that. I'm not saying you can go, you know, you're not maybe going to make a massive difference. And sometimes there's just not enough time. If you catch them at a young age, that's when you really want to catch them. But with pro players and that sort of thing, if we can tweak it, if we can make it a little bit better, that's going to benefit you, right? If you just go in with the attitude of, can't really change the way I skate, well, no, you can't. If that's the way you're going to approach it, but it's something that you've got to commit to. Like I tell all my players, I don't care how old they are, you need to take ownership in your development. You need to. I was just on the ice with the Sting guys the other day in Sarnia, and it was a younger group I had on the ice, and I said, if you guys want, like, I might be out here with you once a week, couple times a month, whatever it might be, but let me tell you, that is not enough time for you to make changes. If you want to make changes, you take the information I gave you today, and from now until I see you again, you continue to work at it and work at it and work at it. And then when I see you again, we'll tweak it and we can fix some things and change some things. And then you go back and you work at it. That's the only way that you're really going to make the changes necessary, the changes that you want to make, and those improvements. But the buy-in is huge. It's the most important thing.
Can you provide any examples of, and I think, Vegas is just a good place to look because there were so many players, obviously, and I know the rosters changed, but there were so many players that were, effectively cast offs, picked up in the expansion draft, and, recreated or reinvented their career, I guess, of players that, an example of like a player that put in the extra work or was really intentional about taking control of their own development?
Um, I don't know that I can say necessarily the guys that came over in the expansion, because I spend more time with the prospects. I wasn't around those guys a
Sure.
lot, but I
Yeah.
will say I think that a lot of those guys, I think that they've been putting in work the entire time. Majority of those guys, it was opportunity. They hadn't been given the opportunity to show how good they were, right? And then a bit of it was also playing with a chip on their shoulder because they were kind of cast offs or let go from their team. So you combine that chip and then you get the opportunity to show it. I think probably more than anything, like obviously they were all working hard. I mean, in order to be in that league, to get to the league, you have to work hard. To stay in the league, you have to work hard. You can't just get there and think, okay, I've made it. It's hard work all the time. And I think that's a big part for those guys, though, is they just got an opportunity, and some of them was just a numbers situation, right? Like
Yeah.
the staff in Vegas did a really good job of identifying some areas that they could take advantage of in the draft, in the expansion draft, and they did a really good job of it. And I think a lot of the NHL has learned from that first draft of different ways. You don't know how you do something. You don't know how to fix mistakes until you've made the mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So
Totally.
once they went through that draft first time, now it's easy for them to say, okay, well, we wouldn't do that again. So that's a big part of it too. But I mean, for my guys, like some of the prospects, like a Nick Hag, I spent a lot of time with Zach Whitecloud, some of these guys that have come through the American Hockey League and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. It was, you mentioned it earlier. I don't overwhelm the guys with too much stuff. It's okay, what is holding you back from making that step? And we'll pick one or two things max. And it's like, okay, work at that. I'll give them, I always say, I'll give you a bit of a guide or a roadmap, and I'll tell you points to hit along the way. And then you go work at it. And I'm going to check in with you, and I'm going to come back and how are we doing with this? You can work through video. I had Nick sending me a lot of video when we were going through the process, and I'd send it back to him and give him some information. But once again, slow it down, right? Don't come out here and race through things. Make sure you take your time. Uh, Pick some spots where you can get on the ice alone, preferably, because especially in junior, it's hard. When you're out on the ice, you see half the team down there playing rebound or whatever at the end of practice, and you're down doing skating drills. Like, you're kind of a loser, right? Like that's the approach that teenage kids take at it, right? Why
Sure.
aren't you down here playing with us? And so try and find a little bit of time where you can get out there on your own. And the other thing for some of those kids, I'll say drag some younger guys out with you, right? Like, so you have someone to do it with, but you're also, now you're not just learning, but you're becoming the coach too. Because
Yeah. That's a great point. That
by
must be
teaching,
super valuable. Yeah.
by, yeah, by teaching someone else, you're seeing how they're moving and you're correcting them. And then you go do it. It's like, oh crap, I'm doing that same thing. So it's almost like you can't look in a mirror when you do it by having someone else out there, they will replicate some of the movements that you do, and that's going to trigger something in your brain to say, it's like you're looking in a mirror. I got to fix that too. So anytime, I think it's good mentorship for the young guys on the team. And so, yeah, there's different approaches like that that we'll take. And then a lot of it too, for me, is having a relationship with my guys. Like, I'll never come in and say, oh man, you've got to do this, this, and this. I always come in with the approach. It's like, what if we were to try this? Or how would you feel about this? And usually you can get them to where you want without such a strong approach. Because if you come in with a strong approach, some players will be like, I don't know, I've gotten this far. I feel like I'm doing something right. Right. And you don't want to be that aggressive. You want to come in and say, well, I think we can tweak this and make it a little bit better if that's what you want. And they're like, we can make it better. Absolutely. That's what I would like. So some of it's approach, but having that relationship with the player is important.
How often is the thing that you're probably coming in thinking they should probably work on this when you ask them? Like, how often do those two things align and just the players are mindful of some of their weaknesses?
Um, it's not 100% of the time.
Sure, sure.
They, it's I don't know if I can put a number on it. I think usually they have most players have an idea of what they need to do,
Sure.
right? And they've got a really good idea. I think sometimes it's a matter of they know what they want to do, but maybe or what they need to do, but maybe there's something they'd like to do that kind of they
Yeah.
recommend that first. And I don't have a problem with that either. Like, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll help you with this, but we need to work on this as well, right? We need
Yeah.
to make sure that this is what's going to help you to make that step. This is, I think, and it's a discussion we'll have. Like, I think this is a good layer to add to your game. Absolutely, I'll help you with that. Or if it's something I'm like, to be honest with you, Aaron, I don't think this is going to benefit you making that step. Let's put more focus on, this uh, subject over here. Let's get you to the point where you at least get a foot in the door, then we'll add that other thing that you want to work on, right? But you got to get foot in the door first.
I thought there was a great article recently. I believe I've read a lot of just with training camp. There's been lots of stuff to dive into, but this was specifically about a young player attending his first camp. It might have been on like one of the major junior websites. And I believe it was a player that was with Pittsburgh. And he had this great observation. And I think the question was something like, what's different about pro hockey? And I'm paraphrasing here, but it was effectively like, at junior hockey, we go through practice and we all want the perfect pass. And if we don't get the perfect pass, then it's like the other player's fault. He goes at pro camp, and I'm pretty sure it was Pittsburgh because he referenced Crosby's like, Crosby almost wants the bad pass because he wants to learn how to pick it up at full speed. And they're almost like, he goes like, I think his message was like, the pro players are at such a level where it's like they're training for the unpredictability of the game and how to develop skills that maybe aren't obvious, but recognizing that that's how you excel in hockey is that at the end of the day, you just have to be able to read and react to whatever the game gives you, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and I think that some of those skills are forgotten skills in the sense that they get overlooked a lot. Um,
Sure.
One of the things, like we call it a finisher, but kind of like in the gym, they have the finisher. They'll get on the Aerodyne bike or something like that. Our
Yeah.
finisher's a little bit different. It's not so taxing, but I'll do a drill where we just go from the neutral zone circle and kind of wheel out to the wall, and every pass is in your feet. We're strictly
Yeah.
passing into your feet, and we'll spend 5 minutes after practice doing that. You know, 3 4 times a month, because it's a skill. And I tell players, how often do you practice that? Well, never. Well, how often in one game do you get past your feet? Oh, it happens all the time. Well, why don't you practice it? If it's going to happen all the time, it's something that you need to practice. And it does happen. And sometimes it happens on purpose because there's no direct angle to your stick. So a good player will throw it at your feet, knowing that you have the ability to kick it up to your stick and continue on in stride. So it's things like that, that, like I say, it's something that needs to be taught more often, I think. And I would consider that a core skill. That would fall under, with skating, passing, being able to pick up a pass is a core skill, whether it's with your stick or with your skate. You're going to get that every single game. So why wouldn't it be a core skill if it's going to happen on multiple occasions every single time you step on the ice? And going back to the kids saying that, that's something else I try and do is I talk to the kids at development camp a lot and at rookie camp, and I try and learn from them too, and
Yeah.
their experiences, and whether it be at our camp or at their junior camp, or you can learn a lot about not only individuals but the kids as a whole on different areas that they feel like they're struggling with. What's I know the kids that I work with a lot, but just in general in different organizations, cities, whatever it might be, where are they lacking teaching? Like you can ask kids questions without being dull and boring to them, to kind of pull that information from them, and they're happy to share it. The kids nowadays will talk hockey. They don't have a problem doing that. If you want to sit down and have a conversation about hockey, they'll talk as long as you need.
Is that just a product, you think, of them just growing up around a lot of really knowledgeable coaches and they're just maybe more accustomed to that now, more comfortable?
Yeah, I think so, but it's also like when I was younger, Um, we played hockey, and I mean, I grew up in a really small town, so in order to play travel hockey when we were younger, you had to play house league because there wasn't enough kids to have a house league program. So I would go to the rink and I would play house league in the morning, and then my siblings would do the same thing, and I would just play road hockey outside, and then I'd play my travel game at night or in the afternoon, and then go home that night and maybe watch a little bit of hockey. Um, but we kind of separated ourselves from it too. We weren't as diehard hockey as they are now.
Yeah.
The kids eat and sleep hockey 24/7 right now, and when I don't remember being like that when I was growing up. I loved it, and every opportunity I got, I would do it. But I also You know, when we were at home, I would just be out in the yard running around. And once again, cell phone, social media gives them access to it that I didn't have when I was younger, so that's part of it. But I think it's good for kids too to have that break from it. You know, mentally, physically, everything. Just be able to shut down. Um, you know, I'm okay with kids shooting pucks at home. You want to shoot pucks every night? Sure, go ahead, but you don't need to shoot 200 pucks every night. Shoot
Yeah.
20, right? It's plenty. Just make sure every shot you take out of those 20 is technically correct. So many kids are just shooting pucks. Oh, I shoot 500 pucks a night. How many of those do you shoot properly? You're just reinforcing bad habits now, right? Shoot 20, shoot everyone properly, and then go take a break. Go for a jog or ride your bike or play basketball outside. Do something different, but you're still getting that hockey fix, but you're doing something else too. But to go back to the original question, that's why part of it, like they're just so um, full into this hockey stuff that you want to sit down and talk, especially about highlights and that sort of thing. They'll talk about it, but I think that the kids are taking an interest in their development too, in a sense that they're not just going through the motions out there. Like they're keen on the stuff they're learning, and they can reiterate. Like if I ask them questions, older kids mainly, they can reiterate a lot of things that they're learning.
How important is asking questions in your role, or asking them maybe the right questions?
Um, for myself or the student, because there's
I think
both.
I think probably, well, both indirectly, but just for you to be a better coach, how valuable is asking good questions?
Specifically for me, like I think I'm anytime I'm around our coaching staffs, I'm without being a nuisance to them, obviously, trying to ask questions, just being a fly on the wall, because I want to make sure everything that I'm teaching is relatable to the things that they're wanting to see. I want to give my players every advantage to be able to make that step.
Yeah, and I mean more so like asking your players questions, whether that's checking for a learning or getting them to explain maybe what they saw on the ice or why they do something a certain way.
So one of the big things, I ask a lot of questions when I teach. Um, I think I'll lose a kid if I just sit there and talk the whole time and then okay, skate down the ice, do a rep, and I don't like not any like there's got to be some explanation, right? But I believe it's got to be more of a conversation as opposed to me just telling you all the time. So I ask a lot of questions. I already know the answer I'm looking for, but I'll ask questions like, okay, when you did that, where did you feel the weight in your skates? And a lot of times the kids will go, well, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, this is important. So I want you to go and do it again. And I want you to recognize and think about where the weight is in your skates. They come back. I'm like, okay, where was the weight in your skates? It was on my toes. Should it be on your toes? Well, no. Okay. So what do we have to do to correct that? Right. I got to lift my chest up. Perfect. Go do it again. Do it again. Where's your weight? It's on balls of my
That's a
feet.
great
Okay.
example.
So we've gotten to where we wanted to get to, and I didn't just tell you how to do it. There's a little bit of problem solving in there. Not hard, but just you answering the questions so that way it sinks in a little bit more rather than just listening to me mumble to you the entire time you're on the ice.
When you look back, and I mean that it's such a good example, and it leads me to this question: that is like, as you've sort of gone through your coaching career, was there a sort of some stages where it was like, you sort of you get a couple drills that you get, become your favorites, and you teach the drill, but then you talk about, the details, and so you get more detailed focus. But then I would, in my opinion, what you just described, when it's like, hey, you can correct a player and like where they're feeling their body weight or just some of those little micro adjustments again. And I partly bring this up. Bruce Cassidy's been on the show, and it's one of my favorite all time lines, and it sticks with me to this day. And he talked about, he's like, players don't always need a practice. Sometimes they just need to get a bit of a different feel. It could be for the puck, it could be on their edges, and they don't always need an hour to do that. Like they just need. Sometimes the game is such a product of feel that it's like you go and swing a golf club. If all of a sudden you hit three good shots in a row, that might be all you need. You might have it back. But I would say from a coaching perspective, being able to guide players for like that takes a lot of time, I think, to develop your craft that to that extent.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I just spoke to someone the other day. I was talking to him. I said, if I could look back 20 some years ago at some of the first sessions that I ran, I would probably laugh at myself. It would be ridiculous to see.
Probably, yeah, yeah.
And it's something that over time you do refine, and I'm constantly tweaking the way that I do things. But I'm big on, like, I'll always tell people, everyone thinks skating is waist down, but if the waist up isn't doing what it's supposed to, then the waist down won't work. It's got to happen. Everything's got to be in sync. So I talk a lot to players about how their body feels, how their body's moving, whether it be during skating, picking up passes, where are your hands, what are you feeling here? Um, I think that's huge, because the first step is their self awareness. And when they get a good self awareness, now they become, once again, the teachers as opposed to me. If you can, to become a really good player, you've got to be able to be your own teacher. You've got to be able to self diagnose. And that comes from understanding, you know, weight shifts and body movements and that sort of thing. So you can figure out what the problem was. But from there, once you know what that problem was, now you can fix it. Right. And I'm not there all the time to do that for you. So that's why when I am there, I try and give you all the information you need to be able to self diagnose and fix when I'm not there. And you're going to get much better by being able to correct yourself all the time versus me occasionally.
You're like YouTube if you don't have an internet connection. You can just go in there and
Right.
yeah, do it
Yeah.
yourself. But I'd be curious, like when you reflect back, like, and skating is a great example. Like, you talk about some of those mechanics with your upper body. Like, how much of that is? And I know this is a tough question to answer, but how much of that is a product of I knew it already? I had conversations with other people that I was able to piece together all these different insights, and how much of it was like just through experience of dealing with players, I started to connect the dots on what some of these mechanics or what they're feeling, and how to put all that together.
Yeah. Well, I think there's certain things that, like, your skating stride, for example, that I don't know if that's ever changed from the time I was born until now, right? Like, there's been some tweaks, some variations to it, and some different ways that I've learned it. Like, some coaches will tell you they want more of a side swing with your arms, like a power skater or like a speed skater. I don't like that, because if you think about it, if you're swinging your arms side to side, then that's going to force, you can't help it, but that's going to force your upper body to go side to side as well. So now one part of your body's doing this and one part of your body's doing this. So they're counteracting one another essentially. A speed
Yeah,
skater has more of a long, drawn out stride. So they can shift their weight over to one foot and then back to the other foot, where I like to stay centered, because you want a long stride, but you also want to move it quite quickly, right? The
yeah,
turnover rate you want to increase. And if your body's moving back and forth or side to side, it's going to make that turnover rate slower or harder. So I think more than anything, the stride hasn't changed; it's tweaked, and it's little things. And I, over time and through working together with other people and asking them questions, and I've kind of come up with my way of teaching it. I
yeah,
don't. I'm not willing to sit here and say it's the only way to do it. It's my best way. It's the closest to my perfect as possible. And there's been a lot of people that I've talked to that kind of have the same philosophies or thoughts. So that's kind of what I go with, right? And if a player comes in and says, "Well, I was taught to do it this way," then I would explain it to them just like I explained it to you. And at the end of it, if they still think that it's better to move your arm side to side, okay, let's see if I can help you with that somehow. I'm not going to make you change the way you do that, um,
yeah.
but let's see if we can tweak it somehow to try and help you speed up, right? Or to help lengthen your stride, or whatever it might be. Majority of the time, once I talk them through it and give them an explanation like I gave you, they'll go, okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, let's do it that way. So I'm flexible that way, but I also like to get them to see my point of view, and hopefully in the end they agree with me, and then that makes teaching it much easier.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot to be said though for every coach kind of figuring it out their own way, because ultimately I think the game has gotten so detailed now with video. Like there's at least from a systems or tactics standpoint, I think there's very few secrets. But I think if I'm a at a high level, if I'm an NHL owner, I'm just hiring coaches or people that can teach it more efficiently and get us to a higher level of execution, or get our group on the same page and in sync more. Like I'm probably not hiring anybody because they've got this secret forecheck, and if they do, everybody's going to know about it. And right away, you're just like, but that's my point, is like being so clear on your own teaching style, your philosophy, how you build things up. I think that's everything in the game now, at least our industry.
Yeah, and I've had families before, that they'll be watching an OHL game or an NHL game, and someone that I've worked with a bunch, and they'll say, "You can see my traits, things that I teach,
Sure.
coming out in those players as you watch them play." Right, so you definitely you get, um, I don't know, kind of your methodology, and you can
Yeah.
start to see it. If you were to mix 3 or 4 kids in with a group, it's like, okay, you can pick them out. If you're around myself and my staff enough to understand how we teach, you'll pick the kids out pretty quickly.
Yeah. What might be, again, I'm sure you just think about the stuff all the time. Why wouldn't you? But if you look at, say defensemen, at some point somebody said, you know what, maybe we let our defensemen pass in front of our own net. And somebody said, maybe we tell them they can't put it off the glass anymore. Maybe we start forcing them in practice to make plays, or you know what, how about we get them to join the rush? And like there was a point where this was like highly debated stuff in somebody's coaching office and whether we do it or not. What is there anything you might point to say what some of the next evolutions in the game could be?
I I think that shot selection is still continues to be a big one. Being able to adjust angles and things like that. Um, Release, like how quickly you can get a shot off from a pass, because everything's happening so quickly now. It's just bang, bang, bang. Well,
Yeah.
if all of the play develops quickly and then it takes you too long to get the shot off, that's going to slow everything down, right? So I think those are big ones. I think that the speed will continue to because kids are continuing to get stronger. But I
Where's that
also
going to go?
think the
The rink's
way
not getting better though. Sorry to interrupt you. That's a great
no,
point though. Think about that a lot. Like how fast can we get? Because we are getting faster, it seems, every year.
I think it's going to start to. We're nearing the peak. I've got to assume, because
Yeah.
you can only go so fast, right? And I mean, you look at Connor McDavid. I don't want to say it's not going to get faster, because there's going to be another freak athlete that comes along, and you're going to go, "Holy cow, he's even faster," right? But it, what I mean by that is not so much that the fastest player is going to get faster. Right now, you've got 2 or 3 players on the ice that are that fast. I think we're going to get to a point where you have 8 or 9 players on the ice that are that fast, right?
I agree with
Everyone
you.
else's pace is gonna pick up to that level, right?
Yeah.
But that not only be able to play at that level, but be able to do things like Connor does, and make plays at that pace as well, and be able to move laterally and chase the puck and bump it the next way, and that's one of the things that I'm teaching players a lot is I've talked about for years is underhandling the puck, because there's no way you can move your hands that fast if you're going to move your feet that fast. You've got to be able to focus on one or the other. One of them has to take more attention. So I'm big on bumping the puck and chasing the puck and getting your feet going. Get the puck to a soft area, chase the puck.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think about this a lot, and this, listen, the NHL could have like a whole R&D department working on this, and I'm just not privy to it, which is cool. But
I won't be either then.
well, yeah, well, no, I think about when you talk about the speed of the game. Is they're gonna like? I think it's unrealistic. Like they're gonna expand to Olympic ice, or they're gonna expand the playing surface. I just feel like just
Yeah, I
the.
don't think so.
But I'm like,
I can't
they're gonna
see
have to
it.
improve the technology of the boards. Like I think that's gonna be one of the evolutions in our game, just from an injury standpoint. Like if I was a really smart person, which I'm not, and if I had any engineering credentials, I feel there's an opportunity to change the technology of our boards, maybe have a bit more give and create a you know a playing environment that's a lot more friendly to the types of. I mean, I just in it, we're going to see bigger collisions and bigger impacts as the game gets faster. And man, it's I went to I watch a lot of hockey, but I had a chance last year. We had some clients in town, and we went to Canucks game, but we watched it from the first row, and it's just like the difference from the 10th row to being at ice level. You're just like, shit, it is so fast and so violent. We just don't appreciate it when you watch it on TV or from up top.
Yeah, and I don't even like watching from the stand. Like typically when I'm at a game, I'm up in the press boxes, and
Yeah,
because partly because it's so fast, you miss so much of the game. Um, when you're down that close to the ice, I like to be way up above, and I can kind of see plays that are developing and
sure.
things like that. But as far as the ice size, I would say with confidence that that's not going to change because there's way too many rinks that they'd have to
Yeah,
revamp to be able to make that happen. The boards, sure, that's way above my head. I hope that they figure something out because I'm just going to continue to try and make players faster, and
yeah,
that's all I can do. Everything else is going to be on the NHL or on the IIHF or whoever it is that has to
yeah.
come up with these solutions.
Yeah, I get it, man. It's above our pay grade, but I think it's
Yeah.
interesting. It'd be interesting to see where that game evolves. Throughout your career, Scott, what have been some of the resources, be it people, perhaps other sports, books, podcasts, whatever? Where have you gone to? Maybe whether it's looking for some inspiration or just some concrete knowledge.
I would say the biggest thing that I like to do is anytime I'm around anyone in the hockey world really is I like to listen first and then speak, or sometimes not even speak. Like I'll just sit and soak it all in, like at development camps and that sort of thing. Take in as much information as I can. Listen to what the coaches are saying. I'll see. I listen to your podcast, especially when I listen to a lot of stuff, so I kind of pick and choose. I'll find some. Oh, this I think this would be really interesting. So
Yeah,
I'll see a clip or something. So I'll check that out. And sometimes I just like I like what like for the Olympics, for example. One of the biggest things I enjoyed about watching the Olympics, and this is going to sound lame, but I was watching the sprinters and watching how their bodies moved and just seeing like how we could relate that or seeing how everything in sync and trying to like I like trying to say, okay, is there anything I can take from that to incorporate into what I do to teach? And it could be something totally different. And when it comes down to it, I like to take the sport out and still say they're athletes, right? So is
yeah,
there an athletic movement that I can incorporate into what we're doing? Like if you think of or diving, for example, when we're teaching turns, if you watch a diver do a twist, it'll teach you a lot about what a jam turn should look like. A lot of people, when they talk about jam turns, it's all about what the feet are doing, and the rotation actually begins from your upper body. And if you're rotating with your wrong shoulder, you're going to get your weight on your heels, which is going to cause you to be off balance, lose speed, and I can go on, right? So if you watch a diver and they go into their twist and you see how much they're forcing that opposite shoulder around, you can learn a lot about how the body moves and then implement that into some of our techniques on the ice.
that's a great observation. That's so true, and I think it's probably getting better with the broadcast because they have more either ex athletes, ex coaches providing the color,
Camera
but
angles.
well, and I think just like it could be any sport, right? It could be like the high jump, and they're like, the difference between getting over the bar. It's not it's the tiny little detail or habit, as you said. Like it's just like, oh, if he
Yeah.
had to turn his chin a little bit more, that makes the difference. And you just realize these body mechanics. And again, I think that's where just sport as a whole has evolved so much is that we understand the human body and how to make it perform at a high level.
And like I'm a hockey guy. I don't have the education to be able to say This is exactly what's happening. I watch it and try and use common sense and say, okay, I see how this is happening. And then for me, I always say, okay, if I'm going to implement anything new, I've got to be able to go out and try it. So I go out and I try and execute it on the ice. Like, okay, I understand the feelings. I got to be able to feel or relate to what the kids are feeling to be able to help to teach them, right? So I'll go through a few steps like that before I actually start to teach it to kids. But I think a lot of it doesn't have to be. You don't have to make it more than it is. Like some of it can just be common sense, and we don't have to use fancy words or anything like that because you got to remember a lot of it. We're either teaching it to kids or we're teaching it to hockey players that they're just focused on hockey. I don't want to confuse them, so don't make it any more difficult than it has to be.
Yeah.
Keep it as simple. Don't make it fancy. Straight to the point, right? And then give them as much information as you can that is understandable for them. And that's the best approach to take. Like there's a lot of people out there that they have, I don't know, I've seen crossovers called 4 or 5 different things, and I'm like, still a crossover, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Put any
Yeah.
twist you want on it, it's still a crossover, right? And I understand people have their own verbiage that they use for things. Like I call it a jam turn. Some people call it a punch turn. That's fine. That's something that when I was young, that wasn't being taught. It was always a tight turn, which we don't really even use anymore because the way we did tight turns, you can't even turn that tight, right? But if you think back to when you were first learning, if you're teaching something that was being taught at that time, stick to whatever it was called at that time because it's been around forever. Let's not try and change it.
I think that's good advice. I think that's good advice. I think there's also we've certainly noticed this just as a whole, like with organizations we work with, like language matters to them, and they're just mindful. Like, call it whatever you like, but if a kid's going to be in our organization, we're all calling it either a jam turn or a punch turn. The kid's not going to have to relearn it every year as they go up, and they really just, I think, gaining alignment amongst their language is really important. Um, Scott, before we let you go, a lot of coaches at younger levels listening. Can you point to any, either it's perhaps details or fundamental skills that you would say, either you should be spending lots of time on this, or maybe here's something that you might really enhance with your players if you can add this little detail?
I mean, the first thing I would say is reiterate what I said earlier, and that is give the kids a chance to fail.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to challenge them, but try and incorporate some form of skating into every one of your practices. And by that, it doesn't have to take up 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It can literally be 5 minutes and it can be a warm up, but do some single leg strides, do some single leg edge work, do like incorporate some of that into it so that the foundational skills are always being taught and you don't have to be, um, a savant in this or someone that's been teaching it forever. There's information that's out there.
Yeah.
Your website obviously has a ton of good information on that basic stuff. It doesn't have to be real like forward stride, single right leg, single left leg, edges, right leg, inside edge, right leg, outside edge, like different things like that. Like just try and incorporate that because like we talked about, sooner or later, everyone's going to be at that high pace, that speed of your Connor McDavids and that. So if we're not putting enough emphasis on the skating, then those kids are going to get left behind, unfortunately. Skating is still, always has been, and it's still to this day is the one most important skill.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Scott, what's the next road trip look like? Where you headed?
Leaving tonight or tomorrow, haven't decided yet. I got an early morning flight about 2 hours away from the airport, so I'll head to Vegas for 5 days with our American League team. Then I come home for, I think I'm home for 5 days, and then I'm off to, where am I after that? I know I'm going to Kingston and I'm going to Rimouski. And then I
Oh
don't know
wow,
that much. Yeah, I've
that's as
got a
far out.
few ahead of me.
That's all right. Well, that's you're gonna have your footprint all over the place. That's a pretty good,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a pretty good trek. Well, hey man, uh, just that being said, realize how busy you are. Really appreciate you spending time with us. And for anybody that is intrigued by this conversation, there'll be a presentation from an event we did recently in Toronto at St. Andrews College featuring an on ice demonstration by Scott that you can check out. So, again, Scott, thanks so much, man. Have a great season.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.